Please welcome Mallory Dimmitt.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you today, and I want to thank Tim and Chris and the entire outside planning team for this opportunity and congratulate you all on this important and impactful gathering, and for your theme, examining ecological and social connectivity, which is I love. So as I start, I know it's dangerous late on a Friday afternoon to lower the lights and then ask you to close your eyes, but it's just for a second, okay? So for this first minute, this next slide will have nothing on it, and I just want you to listen for a second. All right, well, you get the idea. Everyone knows what that noise is. Traffic, right? And think about if you were a panther and it was nighttime and you were at the edge of the road and listening to that, would you have known when to try to dart across? Would you have been able to tell that? And so, I just want us to think about all the ways that what we do in the built environment impacts the natural environment and how they're intimately linked. And you've just experienced sounds recorded from a wildlife underpass that was recorded by the FSTOP Foundation, who deploys and monitors a network of remote camera traps from crossings just like this one. This is a bridge on I-4 spanning Reedy Creek just west of Orlando. And I've actually paddled up to and underneath this bridge during one of our expeditions, and I could hear that traffic noise long before I ever saw the bridge. And so this kind of human disturbance, obviously, is frequent in the corridor. It's increasingly persistent, and it can foreshadow encroaching growth and development. And at this particular space, in fact, if you go up in the air from here to look at the growth all around this area, this is what it looks like now. And there's even multifamily homes really close to the creek from where we paddled through just a few years ago. It's filled with new developments just like this one, new communities as Orlando expands outward. And so you all probably know that one of the greatest threats to wildlife and native plant populations is habitat fragmentation, and that ex-urban development is quickly degrading our remaining essential habitat. Florida's been growing at a rate of about 1,000 people a day for decades, and you've all seen the changes in the landscape as a result. And I think sometimes that pace and scale of development can feel overwhelming. And so I like to say hope is not lost. There's a movement happening around the globe for wildlife corridors and a growing understanding of the importance of keeping natural habitats connected for the benefit of all species, humans included. And so that's our mission at the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation, illustrated in this watercolor map by Mike Reagan. I'm always careful to say that the idea of the Florida Wildlife Corridor has been around for decades. The current collaborative campaign, really, that effort began in Earth Day 2010, and so we just celebrated 15 years of advocating for the corridor. And the founders of this corridor campaign were really intentional about the sort of formula we use of art and storytelling combined with science, plus a bit of adventure, to capture people's interest and bring them along on the journey to achieve this ambitious mission, as you can see on the map. And so for the adventure piece, we drew inspiration from a Florida black bear named M34, and I usually tell that story, but I'm skipping it for you today. But just know that he went on a 500-mile journey through South Central Florida in 2021. And so similarly, we set out to bring attention to the opportunity to protect the corridor through two epic 1,000-mile treks in 2012 and 2015, and you can see those route lines here. And the team included Carlton Ward Jr. on the left, who's a National Geographic photographer and conservation journalist, and you're seeing all of his photos today. I take no credit for these photos. He's an excellent photojournalist. And on the right, that's Joe Guthrie, bear biologist, and now runs the predator-prey program at Archibald Biological Station. And we were accompanied each time by a team of behind-the-scenes support that included a film crew who had by far the hardest job, schlepping all the heavy gear and equipment and documenting it all while we were on the move. I'm going to take you with us on a quick overview of that. Some of you have seen this before, but we began in January 2012 at the edge of Florida Bay, starting off by kayak. And this is the very first wild animal we encountered, right at the start, really. an American crocodile, and I thought, like, all right, we're off to a great start here. It's only, we wound our way through the myriad bays of the Everglades, and then into and upstream through the River of Grass, push-pulling at times, and then to the cypress strands and hardwood swamps of the western Everglades, where you can still see rare ghost orchids. And onward to the pine flatwoods. We crossed 29 different private cattle ranches in between those public lands on that first trek, spanning an array of natural habitat types like scrub and sandhills that support, of course, the Florida scrub jay and bobcats and the Florida black bear, and also some places that you might not think of as conservation lands, including Avon Park Air Force Range, which is integral to understanding the management and science to maintain the Kissimmee Prairie. Just earlier today, it was so great to hear that Groveland is becoming a dark sky city, and Kissimmee Prairie Preserve State Park is a dark sky park, so also attracting dark sky tourism. But here we were looking for the most endangered bird in all of North America, the Florida grasshopper sparrow, who is on the brink of extinction, but whose numbers are now increasing, which is exciting. And on to places, there's a grasshopper sparrow, on to places like Disney's Wilderness Preserve, the Disney Wilderness Preserve near Kissimmee, where you can still see the night sky, and where active land management, including the use of prescribed fire, helps ensure that native species, including some of the rarest residents of these longleaf pine forests, like this red cockaded woodpecker, can continue to multiply or recolonize former habitat. And so after 52 days trekking through the Everglades watershed, just think about that, 52 days, we crossed into the headwaters of the St. John system and then worked our way north, taking in the Econ-Lockhatchee River and darting across I-4, just don't do that, to the springs and prairies of Ocala and then Osceola National Forests, seen here at Ocean Pond, and then paddling the Swanee River, working our way upstream to the Georgia border at the height of spring, where nature's palette was on full display with this Ogeechee tupelo trees leafing out in their bright spring green overhead of those tannin-colored waters that appear orange when they're flowing over these rippled sandbars. And the dry season then came to a really abrupt end at near the state line as we were paddling upstream and the water started coming down out of the Okefenokee. But the stormy skies just made the spring appear even brighter, and we were delighted by the colorful glimpses of migrating prothonotary warblers and, of course, numerous alligators inhabiting the Okefenokee, which is called Land of the Trembling Earth, as we wrapped up that first journey on Earth Day in 2012. And we later produced a film and a photo book. And as you can see on the map here, the peninsular journey ignored all of West Florida and Northwest Florida. So we set out to do it again, another 1,000-mile trek from Glades to Gulf, from the Everglades headwaters to Gulf Island's National Seashore on the Alabama border. And this time we crossed underneath I-4, a low, dark, and wet crossing that was designed to allow passage to a private ranch that was split when the interstate was built 50 years ago. And this is definitely not a wildlife crossing, but I'm thrilled to report that a new wildlife underpass has been constructed very nearby here since this expedition, and it was completed late last year, and they've documented all kinds of wildlife using it, which is wonderful. You can watch those videos from FDOT and FSTOP. So under I-4 this time, right? And then we traversed through the Green Swamp, worked our way northwest to the Gulf Coast and the spring-fed Chassahowiska River, and from the Chassahowiska National Wildlife Refuge via saltwater paddling trail to Crystal River, where many of you have probably been to see the manatees. I'm not keeping up here with my clicking. Keep them going. We included a side trip to the Rainbow River inland here, and then biked north up and around the Big Bend, stopping to meet with legislators in Tallahassee in our field clothes, which was a great experience, and ultimately paddling 14 different rivers, including the Apalachicola River, shown here, on a very cold, sub-32-degree night with a clear sky in all its glory, paddling on through the Dead Lake on the Chipola River, watching osprey and all the treetops, and finally paddling into the town of Apalachicola, and spending several days there examining the declining river flow's role in the health of the estuary and of the oyster industry and the implications for the health of the Gulf and beyond. And then before moving west across Apalachicola National Forest and Bradwell Bay, this is a kind of infamously wet stretch of the Florida National Scenic Trail, And through places west of there, like Ngozi Plantation and Eglin Air Force Base and Blackwater River State Park, shown here, and State Forest, that together account for 1 million acres of contiguous longleaf pine forest in Florida and Alabama, and support hundreds of species, some of whom are getting a boost from biologists in the form of these artificial nest cavities. And so after those first two incredible experiences and then sharing the films with PBS and screenings around the state, those epic expeditions were really proof of concept that we could travel the state twice on connected natural lands, bringing attention and visibility to the corridor that was there on the ground. People think of it as something as we have to build a wildlife corridor, but we were making the case that wild Florida was hiding in plain sight, the proverbial backyard of 23 million Floridians, to educate that this corridor already existed, but it needed to be protected permanently in order to endure. And we realized that to be effective advocates, we couldn't just show the beauty of what was there, as that you've seen, but we needed to demonstrate what we stand to lose if we don't collectively take action. And so that kind of brings me to this series of maps that was developed by Thousand Friends. Thank you, Thousand Friends of Florida and partners, to show the projected growth of developed lands across the state. And this is the baseline, because at that time, this is the baseline from 2010 that shows the existing developed land in red in 2010 and the conservation lands in green here. And then this is the projected development for 2060. So it's really dramatic. Let's do that again. 2010, 2060. And that study's been updated since, a decade further to 2070, when we predict Florida to have 33 million people. And so here you can see that baseline on the left, and then the 2070 growth as usual scenario in the middle here. And on the right, there's an alternative land use pattern that accommodates the same number of the projected population, but with a more compact growth pattern of development and increase in protected lands, benefiting Floridians by protecting those missing links, the agricultural lands that connect all the conservation lands in the corridor. So our message is not anti-development at all, but instead we recognize that how we grow matters in terms of keeping Florida wild. And the Florida Wildlife Corridor is not just about wildlife. You can't get all the benefits of the name of it in the name, but you're seeing this aerial photo here of Disney Wilderness Preserve in the Everglades headwaters, just south of Orlando. And connected lands in the corridor also protect our water supply and our water quality, lands that facilitate aquifer recharge or aid in carbon capture and sequestration, along with other ecosystem service benefits. And one of the biggest benefits of connected conservation really is resiliency, that networks of connected and protected areas are inherently more resilient than individual isolated patches or islands of habitat. So we also recognize that failing to protect our lands and the waters that has economic and environmental costs, of course. Corridor is critical for water storage, flood mitigation, water quality, as I mentioned, but also food security, health and recreation, carbon sequestration. Rapid human development, climate change, and habitat fragmentation all imperil those services. For example, wetlands provide, for services that wetlands provide, for example, and we know that 44% of wetlands in Florida and 50% of wetlands across North America have already been lost. So it was that kind of information that beginning in 2018, our organization has worked with many partners to produce these shorter and regional expeditions focused really on narrow bottlenecks in the corridor. I think I have to click this one to make it sort of show. And those vulnerable edges that are at the highest risk of being lost from conversion to development. And so our first short film in that vein is one of my favorites, and it's called The Last Green Thread. You can see the route here between the Everglades headwaters and the Green Swamp. And this connected really along the western edge of the fast expanding Orlando metro area. And so I'm going to play this film teaser for you so that you can get a short taste of the film, The Last Green Thread. Give it a second to load. There we go. This track is basically unknown.
In the night when my body slept in my bed, my mind was running through the woods instead.
Right here. Let's get it.
100 miles an hour in the fast lane, 100 miles an hour toward the light.
What makes this so cool is really being explorers again.
See the curve in that river's bed. Now look at you when I see my friend.
We know the boundaries of this green ribbon,
100
but there's
miles
not a
an
hiking
hour
trail,
in
there's
the
not a paddling
fast
trail.
lane. 100 miles an hour to the air.
It's going to be a sufferfest for a few days.
Holy shit. I can't think of any better people to suffer with.
My heart just beat like a Cherokee drum. And in the morning when the sun does come, 100 miles an hour in the fast lane. 100 miles an hour in the fast lane. 100 miles an hour till I'm done.
I love that film, and I think I love the soundtrack, so it helps make it great. And I'm just tell a quick story there, but on that expedition, 2018 was after Hurricane Irma in 2017. So not only was there no trail, but also all the trees were down. So the going was very slow, and on the first day, we'd been trekking all day. We put a drone up, and we were like, you could still see Disney Wilderness Reserve. We had made it like not very far at all. I thought, this is not going to go well, and we're going to have to really, and so from then on, I was the lead, like just put me on the compass point, and we were not going around things, we're just going straight through them and tried to make some time. But it was a lot of fun, although we did term the coin Sufferfest in that one, which was great. But on to, so that was our first in this sort of series of shorter expeditions, and this is our most recent shorter expedition film. And let's see, I've lost my place here, but this trek called Strand to Slough took place in November of 2024, and it includes 4 new trekkers you can see here from the 4-county region in Southwest Florida. And you can see that the map started really at Big Cypress and Fakahatchee Strand Preserve State Park and worked our way north up through some already conserved lands in dark green, and then through these really important but not yet protected places in the Camp Key Strand connecting over to the Crew watershed, sort of on the west side of this map, and back then to OK Slough and up to the Caloosahatchee River. And so this film I cannot show you yet, but it is being premiered today in about an hour, the sneak peek in Naples to an audience of the trekkers, their families, donors, and supporters who helped make that trek happen. But what I do have for you is a very short, kind of behind-the-scenes look of what it's like to put on an expedition like this that was filmed with our crew while we were out there in the field during this week and then played at the finale, which was at Corkscrew Swamp Sanctuary. And the point of this slide here is just to remind you sort of what's so important about Southwest Florida is the habitat for wading birds, especially wood-sort colonies and nesting areas, and of course, a Florida panther. So let's check out this behind-the-scenes expedition footage.
Those are very different. But the cool thing is, there's always people who are looking ahead, right? Visionaries.
I'm a new man.
All right, and that film is going to be titled, not that film, but the actual film, Patchwork Wild, Stitching the Last Strands. And that name is really intended to inspire the image of piecing together the best remaining parcels to protect the sort of patchwork quilt of wild Florida that still exists in Southwest Florida and across the state, even as some pieces are lost. And you caught a glimpse of this new sign unveiling in that video from Fakahatchee Strand Preserve State Park. And it's my hope that you'll start seeing these signs everywhere, everywhere that people enter into or visit the corridor. We've been working with the state on creating a concept for a universal mark that will be one consistent emblem that would tell you you're in the Florida Wildlife Corridor, or welcome to the Florida Wildlife Corridor, regardless of what land ownership or land management unit you cross. So from Florida State Forest to Florida State Park to water management districts, and ultimately the federally managed lands and private landowners have the ability to opt to have these signs as well. So that's what that was about. And as we kind of transition now to this chapter of the talk, I want to really talk about that trajectory from expeditions to impact. We know that art and storytelling can be useful tools in opening the aperture to bring a new or different audience in, to creating opportunities to educate and inspire, to grow interest and the trust that's needed to become an effective advocate. And we and many conservation partners have used that approach successfully with legislators and decision makers as our direct target audience. And now where we're making films and traveling exhibits and mural tours for elected officials at both the state and local level, and in the case of murals, to develop community pride in being a gateway to the corridor or to get out and explore the corridor. So a couple of years ago, we worked with National Geographic to produce this film called Saving the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And its purpose was really to tell legislators why the corridor mattered. And happened that COVID hit in 2020 and we weren't able to be in the Capitol as usual, but we worked hard to arrange individual screenings with legislators so they could see this film. I remember sitting in the, what's the IMAX theater right off the Capitol, which should normally hold a lot of people, but we did individual screenings and maybe groups that you were, in the COVID times to get everybody to see. But I'm going to show you just this very short clip of Saving the Florida Wildlife Corridor from National Geographic.
Florida is like no other place on earth. It's the land, it's the water, it's the people, and the Florida Wildlife Corridor is the backbone that connects it all.
But we are seeing changes because of those 1,000 people a day that are moving to Florida.
We have to maintain that our environment in the state of Florida is our #1 priority. Without it, we do not have healthy water, we do not have healthy beaches, and people don't come here.
It took Mother Nature and God a long time to develop this land like it is, and we just need to slow down and figure out how we're going to save it.
I'm only giving you short teases today of each of these, but you can find all the films on our website, floridawildlifecorridor.org/films. But that one, was particularly just kind of featured 7 individuals from around the state whose livelihood depends on the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And it was really meant to kind of get at the economic and legacy impact of the corridor. And I'm proud to report that it worked. It was very helpful in making the case to legislators, and in 2021, next year after that film, the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act passed in the state legislature with unanimous support. Every single member voted to support the Florida Wildlife Corridor. still worth celebrating. And if you spent time in Tallahassee this year, you know that's very hard to have a lot of cooperation, especially across party lines. But what they also did beginning that year and for the next 3 years is allocated an incredible amount of money. So that year, the act itself recognizes the geography of the corridor in state statute and encourages its conservation requires all the state agencies to help voluntary landowners who are interested in becoming part of the corridor. And it allocated $400 million in that first year, which really had the effect of re-energizing the state's land conservation programs. And then repeated that number next year and more the next, so that in the first 3 years, there were $2 billion allocated to the state's land acquisition programs, which has been hugely helpful in really supercharging the process and getting it going. And that continued land acquisition funding is obviously going to be critical for this to become a reality. You heard a little bit, it was great to hear Commissioner Parks today talk about Lake County Forever, which is the ballot initiative, and he told you it passed with 80% support. So not only have we had wonderful state funding for the last several years, but this is the first time in 2024 that our organization got behind 4 of those county-level ballot initiatives that all passed with greater than 70% support in November. So that's so exciting. And it's working. I mean, that's what I really want you to know. Is that the 82 properties that you can see here scattered throughout the state, totaling 305,000 acres, have been approved for protection in the corridor since the signing of the act. So that's about a 3-fold increase, actually a 4-fold increase in 3 years. So it's great to see. And at the same time, just like I loved all the statistics today, measuring really the indicators of the numbers and the metrics of what would work if all of these places in the case studies today were to adopt these practices. We undertook an economic study of the corridor with analysis by McKinsey that was trying to talk about and communicate the value of the corridor to folks who resonate best with those numbers. And that study at the end of 2021, beginning of 2022, told us that, and these are conservative numbers, that the corridor employs or directly and indirectly supports 114,000 jobs, and $30 billion in annual value. So that number repeats itself every year. That includes both direct and indirect, again, economic sectors, but also valuing the ecosystem services that the corridor provides. And it looked at the cost of protecting the corridor in this decade, and then that $30 billion annually and return on investment to calculate a 6x return on investment. And so we felt like it's very important to be able to communicate to legislators and business leaders about those values. And what that study also showed us is that it's urgent that we protect the corridor now, and it helped us sort of think about prioritizing the 8 million acre opportunity area into kind of where you act next. So don't get too worried about this graphic, but if you just look at the far right column here in that darker teal color, you'll notice that those are the highest, the acres that are at the highest threat for conversion to development. And those numbers underneath add up to 500,000 acres that are at risk by 2030 to conversion to development. And then if you look at the highest ecological value in the next most urgent tier, you add an additional 400,000 acres. So we've been giving ourselves this sort of 900,000 acre urgent and vulnerable context about trying to organize our work. And that's really a paradigm shift for the land conservation community that used to go after, I'm not going to say the least urgent, but the places where the dollar could stretch the most, and we have to be thinking about actually expending the dollars that are at the edge of development now. So that's been an important shift, and for us, for our organization, that looks like this. We've helped identify 14 bottlenecks or areas in the corridor that are really narrow that you can see sort of on the right side of the map. And then we've also looked at the 10 counties that have the most opportunity area and that high level of development pressure, so those most urgent acres. And if you think about the I-4 corridor, obviously a lot of these counties surround the I-4 corridor because loss there, would really separate North Florida and South Florida from ecological connectivity, and we know that it's growing so quickly. But it also includes Leon County and Collier County and some of those Nature Coast counties with Citrus, Hernando, and you see Lake in there where we are right here. So let's see. We've begun focusing more on that county level planning effort, as was talked about in many conversations today. And we started in Polk County, the fastest growing county in the nation, with bringing together partners in Polk and then Ocala. And there's one coming up at our upcoming summit that's going to talk about this corridor right through here, through Lake County, called The Last Green Thread, that you saw the film about. But this gives you a little glimpse of what these Mind the Gap workshops do. And if you're interested in getting into the weeds of planning for protecting the corridor at this level, you might want to join us for these Mind the Gap workshops.
One of the real points and goals for this workshop is to get stakeholders in the room that wouldn't otherwise perhaps have an opportunity to engage with one another.
We start with kind of a stylized view of how scientists think about prioritization.
One of the things that needs to happen more is to make sure that we all get together every now and then and have conversations with each other.
Polk has some real smart things that they're doing.
The Mind the Gap breakout session that we had originally didn't stop in the room.
If we're not having these conversations together, we'll miss something again despite our best intentions.
The most recent one was in Volusia County, and someone told me earlier today how much they appreciated those workshops. And the group that comes out of it is called the Gap Minders, which I love. So we'll give you a geeky title and put you in charge of watching a place in the corridor, bringing your neighbors and stakeholders together to make sure that it gets protected. And I mentioned also another element of this impact campaign for murals and bringing them to corridor gateway communities to develop local pride in an area for what's in your backyard and to be that sort of destination for the corridor. So we began this mural campaign in Crystal River, which is the mural you can see here, focusing on underwater and above ground and the diversity of the corridor right in Crystal River's backyard. And I've got a little highlight reel of the mural campaign as well.
For being on board with this project.
Well, that last one was paint by numbers. So people got to come out and join it, which was really fun. And this image here is from our office in St. Pete. So come visit us if you're in St. Pete, and we're in the Warehouse Arts District. And that's not the final. Let me try and get you to the vinyl. Oh, maybe that. The wing is not dark black. I think I have a interim photo here, but anyway, it's a gorgeous mural on our office. And like I said, we've now taken this around the state. So this is in Brooksville. This is on the wall, actually on the way into Brooksville City Hall. It's a hugely tall wall and needed to be a vertical mural. And I was just told by Caroline that the same artist, Justin Alsadek, who painted this mural, has painted a mural not very far from here and kind of around the corner that you all can check out. And this is another huge mural, but linearly huge, on the Ocala water tank at the entrance to the historic district in Ocala by Christian Stanley Creative. And then he also painted 3 murals, 3 for the price of 1, in the town of White Springs here, because they wanted these done by Florida Trail Fest earlier this spring, and put them in 3 places, which I love. And then, right now, last week on Friday, we unveiled a new mural at Lakeland at the RP Funding Center to talk about the importance of that Saddle Creek and Upper Peace River watershed in Lakeland's backyard. And the next one will be in Monticello in Jefferson County, and that sort of kickoff is coming up on May 10th. So I love the idea of using, art and the corridor to inspire people in their backyard, but also just as really tangible ways of how ecology and the social environment come together. And so that brings me to another way to help translate that ecological and social connectivity between the corridor and communities is to help increase the compatibility of those communities as they're being planned. And we're approaching that through these voluntary design guidelines. And the guidelines have been developed thanks to a working group that was led by Lindsay Stevens and Leslie Bertolotti, who's here of the Nature Conservancy, and the group at Cadence, and that included several people in this room who have all participated and volunteered their time over the last few years to develop, refine, and bring together these guidelines. And these guidelines are going to be shared and presented in just a few weeks at the Corridor Connect conference in early June. So thank you so much for the work that's gone here. I think much like the plant palette materials and the New Yard guidelines, this is going to be an excellent resource for those who are planning new communities. And there's some talk of, and the idea of actually developing this into a kind of an independent third-party certification process. And I've also heard, and Ernie, I don't know if it's okay to disclose that, Deering Park is volunteered to be the first candidate to test that process for us and to go through the certification process. So that's really exciting. So a lot more to come on corridor compatible communities. But when this idea came, and I know Leslie has heard and others have heard, developers said to us, like, well, why has no one ever told me about the Florida Wildlife Corridor? And when we go to permit our developments, we only are required to think about species and water and wetlands, of course, but there's nothing that requires us to think about ecological connectivity. And so that's the goal, really, of these design guidelines, and to know that we're going to have more and more development. We're going to have more development encroaching into the corridor, but how can we make it better? So let's see. As we begin this sort of wrap up this talk, what I want to stress, I think, that I've learned after 15 years really in this campaign, is that I think the big, bold vision of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, again, it stretches the entire state, 18 million acres, so roughly half of the land area of the state, was that size, that sort of boldness, was key to the corridor's success. And as you all have been talking about all these exciting case studies and projects today, it made me think about, what framework can you all similarly come together in your industry to choose that challenges and inspires us for the future that we all desire. And so what is the parallel for kind of that boldness in action? And one great thing about the corridor is it's got something in it for everybody. It doesn't really have a lot of detractors. There aren't people who are against nature and wildlife, and that's wonderful. But there's enough in it, and it's broad enough, and it touches every organization's corner of the state that people can relate to some part of the way that they can be involved in the Florida Wildlife Corridor campaign. And you've seen the kind of, through the impact campaign and the programs, the different ways that we're using to be able to reach people in that effort. So what are the parallels, for your industry? And when I think about connectivity, it really comes down to that we all require essentially the same things for not only our survival, but how we thrive. And so for me, those are basic, but also universal. And this one is meant to show, we need habitat. We need patches of habitat of all sizes and shapes that provide shelter. We need food. We need it to be produced locally, especially if you're, living something, you need to have it very accessible. We need water, we need clean water, but we also need the processes that watersheds provide. And we need safe travel. We need safe passage. We need to be able to travel free from harm, and we need to have that connectivity. And ultimately, we need hope. And I have optimism today because I know there are people around the state who are taking action to help spread the message of the Florida Wildlife Corridor and of the need and the opportunity to protect wild Florida before it's too late. And what I've witnessed here with you all today is that you all are also spearheading and are ambassadors for those next frontiers in the corridor. So I love to think about the area that's truly wild, but we're working on what comes next, what's outside of that wildland urban edge, and across the rest of the built environment and our green infrastructure. It's all connected, and I want to thank each of you for planning and planting Florida's future. So with that, I'm going to wrap up, and I know we have a lot of time for questions. And while Tim comes up for questions, I'll let you see here that these are the ways you can follow along the progress of the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which we would love. And I mentioned several things that are coming to that Corridor Connect conference, which is a way to, I think, continue some of the conversation you're having here today, especially if you're interested in the corridor-compatible communities. And those next films will be showcased at this conference. And so this QR code will take you to get information about how to register, so if you're interested in that. All right. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you, Mallory. Another round of applause. That was so inspiring. I'm sure you guys can see the reason why we asked Mallory to come speak about the corridor is because what outside is doing hopefully connects with the corridor, that we can rewild our built environment, rewild our lived spaces, and create an immediate connection to the natural lands that we're working so hard to conserve. I haven't got any questions through the QR code submitted, so if anybody has a question for Mallory, just raise your hand and I will bring the mic over to see you.
Hi, I just wondered about the panthers. It seems like the one area that has been conserved is already inhabited, but it's by panthers.
Yes.
No, I don't mean panthers. I mean pythons. Pythons. It's the pythons that worry me.
Panthers, pythons, and people are an interesting mix. And so that's an astute observation. Southwest Florida, the core breeding habitat for the Florida panther is being encroached on as we're watching Naples and Fort Myers grow east. That's for sure. I mean, there is a strong holding there of public lands, which is wonderful. But we know that a male panther needs 250 square miles to roam, one individual panther. And so that's bigger than New York City and, I don't know, Orlando and lots of places. So we need many of habitat patches of that size in a connected way in order for the recovery of the Florida panther to be a success. And we know that they are moving north. I'm sure many of you have watched probably the film Path of the Panther that really documented the first female panther north of the Caloosahatchee, so that the breeding territory is starting to move north out of that Southwest Florida area, not just be confined to south of the river. And so that's exciting because it's happening on its own and it's working. And there's been a lot of effort as well to protect against some of the main ways of death for Florida panther, which happens to be vehicle strikes. So if we think about the places where FDOT is really focusing their wildlife crossings, that's been primarily in Southwest Florida, but now that's spreading to the rest of the state. So that gives me a lot of hope. And ultimately, male panthers roam large areas, but we need their breeding habitat to continue to increase. And the numbers are northward of, somewhere around 200 animals now. But if you recall, a couple decades ago, and when I was in middle school, when we adopted the Florida panther as our state animal, there was something like less than 30 individuals at the time. So 200 is going in the right direction. Pythons are going the wrong direction. Faster than panthers are going in the right direction. So also on that same expedition, just a few months ago, we had the Conservancy of Southwest Florida come to a question and answer session, and they rolled out a 15-foot long python skin, and it took longer than this stage. And that is a real strong visual that makes you just, they count the number of pythons that have been killed in tons. So the biomass that these pythons are overtaking our natural areas is incredible and having all kinds of impacts to the environment. And that's a really hard problem to curb. So I commend everyone. There are a lot of efforts that are happening, but it is not an easy solution to fix. And they're just working their way north. Yeah, slowly.
We have a question over here.
I had a question about corridor compatibility as far as development goes. There seems to be an issue nationally, actually. Whenever you do new development in areas that previously don't have any development, there's a lot of expectation from the new homeowners that they're not part of the nature that they're observing, and so every time a coyote makes off with a white fluffy dog, then everybody's up in arms. And is there any kind of guidelines going towards that? Or I'm a landscape designer, I'm just seeing what's out there as far as the solutions.
Yes, and I mean, it's a really parallel problem to, I think, people, just understanding the need for and adopting native plants. Similarly, people just want what they had where they came from, right? Like they have that bias. And so it's an education challenge to overcome. And I think there are a lot of great programs that try to teach how to live, in bear country with wildlife compatibly, but I would not say that we have it all figured out. There's a lot of work to go there. And that's why I think these programs that are really aimed at building pride in the residents for what is in their backyard are the best ways to approach that. They make them active participants in wanting to see the corridor protected. And if you're buying into a community that has already done its planning around allowing for wildlife movement, then hopefully you're more open to that idea and gonna then do your own part to not leave your trash can unlocked or those sort of other things. I often remind people, the bears were here first. This is a really regular complaint, that all the conservation organizations get. But I think it's been decreasing in years. People's tolerance and appreciation for nature is sort of winning out. So, yeah.
Do you have a preference with respect to how you preserve the land, be it through simple acquisition or conservation or other? What is your preference? Taking into consideration, you got to stretch dollars, et cetera.
Yep, all of it. I like all of it. I like often, what is it? Vote early and often, but keep all the acquisition tools and land protection tools in the toolbox. So, as we're advocating for the state programs, we're careful to really to explain to legislators that we need both approaches. We need outright acquisition. There are places that are just too special, and there are times when landowners don't have someone to pass it on to, and they're ready for a sale. And so it's very appropriate for the state to do acquisition in those times, but increasingly, and at each cabinet meeting since the Florida Wildlife Corridor Act, the percentage of the acres of the land deals are being done now by conservation easement. And that's a great trend because then the state doesn't have to manage those lands long term, and the private landowner is engaged, and that conservation easement stays with the land in perpetuity. And then I'm also really interested in what are the other market mechanisms, what are the next set of tools beyond just land acquisition that can be either introductions to more permanent conservation, and I think about these payment for ecosystem services that really reward private landowners for the benefits they're providing, that it's goods to all of us, with annual payments. And if you're an agricultural producer, and I've worked for an ag company for a long time, and I know that it's profitable some years and not profitable other years, and the profitability is marginal at best, that those annual payments really help them make the decision between staying or leaving, or selling to development. And so the more we can do to continue to develop those PES markets, the better. We have them already for Florida for water storage, and that's working well in Southwest Florida, but could be expanded elsewhere in the state. And there's a pilot program for panthers this year that was subscribed 5 times over the available funding in the first year. Yeah. So the landowners are interested and they want it. And for the conservation practitioners, that gives us time to develop a relationship with that landowner, to build trust. It takes time for them to consider permanent conservation. And so that's a great intermediate step. Yeah, good question. Yes. Well, earlier this week, this Earth Week had a lot of great things happening. But Wednesday, I think they broke ground on the first dedicated wildlife overpass in the state, which is going to go over I-4 near Florida Polytechnic, so between Lakeland and Orlando, and connect Tenorock Wildlife Management Area sort of on both sides. So we have, you can think of the Cross Florida Greenway, we have some some things built to go over roads, but they weren't intended for wildlife. So that's the first one. And it really brings to mind, what do we do about places like the Caloosahatchee? And could we have greater panther dispersal north if we had a bridge that was not for cars, but for wildlife? So I know that's been part of the conversation. It's not something I've engaged in too much. They will swim the river, but they would prefer not to. So it's a great solution. Yeah.
Mallory, you've done such a great job covering everything. We're so grateful to you to have shared some time with us today.
Yeah.
And for delivering our keynote. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mallory.
you so much
One
for
more
the
round of
opportunity.
applause.
Appreciate it.